For this Monday's lesson, what we're going to be doing is we're taking that other paper bag half. So this is one of the fronts or back sides of the bag, so the big kind of sheet. And we're going to be measuring a square. So we're starting off with a ruler, and it should be 4 inches by 4 inches. And I'm doing this in pencil right now. And there you go, there's the measurements right there. But I'm also going to outline it so that you can see it clearly. You can outline it if you want, it's optional. I'm just taking some of my drawing pens to outline that so you can see it clearly. All right, so there is going to be an interior box here. The interior box is 2 by 2. And if you wanted to get it perfectly centered, what you can do is you can measure from the side of the big box and measure 1 inch in on all 4 sides. That's what I did. And this is an assignment that you're going to be turning in. All right, so just like I did with the big box, I'm going to go in with my special pen, my drawing pen there, and outline that just so it's more visible on the screen for you guys. So you have kind of a square within a square. So what we're working on is something called a gradient. A gradient is very similar to the term ombre. So it's a transition and it's a smooth shift from one value to the next. Value in art means how light or dark a hue is. So a hue being like gray could be a hue. So how light or how dark. So on gradients, they usually go either from dark and fade up to light, or they'll do the opposite. So what we're doing is we're taking the big box and we're working on the bottom first. And I started off with a 4B pencil, but then I have the intention of going back in later with a 6B to darken it up. But remember, it's always better to go a little bit lighter than you think in case you make a mistake. So I do that always. Now I'm using the 2B, so that's the yellow Ticonderoga pencil, and that's so I can transition, just dissolve the shading kind of seamlessly into that brown of the paper bag there. Remember, that's your toned paper. You want that brown to kind of show through. That's actually helping you. The brown serves as a value. It's a mid-tone, because if you took a picture of that paper bag in black and white, you would see it's not white, like the tape is white up at the top of the page. That's white. The bag is more of a mid-tone. It's a middle gray. So let that middle gray do its job. Although it's really a middle brown. So now you can see me going in with the 6B, and I'm really trying to intensify that shading on the bottom. When you have a gradient, you don't want to be able to see the shift between the darker value to the lighter value to a little bit lighter. It should be seamless. So there shouldn't be like a stripe there. It should just fade. You get that effect really well with spray paint. You can do that with spray paint really well, but you can also achieve it here too. Almost this kind of smoky look. So dark on the bottom, lighter, lighter, lightest than the brown of the bag. What we're doing with this outer square is exactly what you would do if you were shading a form shadow. So it'd be like the form shadow on a cylinder. So the inner square, which you see me starting right there, is actually kind of a reproduction of a cast shadow. So remember, a form shadow is a shadow that's actually on the form itself. And a cast shadow is a shadow that's being cast by the form onto a ground plane. So here's the deal with the cast shadows, just to remind you that cast shadows are darkest right beneath the object or closest to the object. The farther that cast shadow drifts away from the object, the slightly paler it gets. It's not a sharp transition, but we're going to try for that within that interior box. So we're essentially practicing our way of making shadows. If you make a shadow, a cast shadow, all one value, it's going to be a little bit boring. It's going to have way more dimension to it if you have it transition. And again, this is another form of a gradient. It's just a dark gradient. So you can actually see there on mine that it's not perfect right now, that you can see kind of a barrier between that middle gray and the lighter gray. So I'm going to work on that. I'm going to try and soften it, get it smoky, and all without the use of a blending stump. This is what your assignment should look like so far. Now we're just going to go ahead and work in the whites. So here's what I noticed from looking at some of your work from last week on the forums, that you don't have to necessarily press as hard as you can with the whites. That's not really the goal. The white pencil should be treated in a similar fashion as a graphite pencil. So that means that you don't necessarily need to press down as hard as you can. That's going to cramp up your hand, and it's also going to create this blinding patch of white that's rather flat. So here's what I want you to do. I want you guys to ease off your pressure a little bit. And just like with the graphite pencil, you're going to get a transition. So the gradient in this case is going to be kind of bright white, and then you're going to be fading it into the brown of the paper. And you want to fade it so that the square, you can still see a patch of the brown paper. So the white's just going to dissolve into the brown, and then there's going to be a separation between the white pencil and the graphite pencil. So they're not going to ever be touching. So in this case, the white can be adjacent to the graphite, but never the two shall mix. It's one of those cardinal art rules. And that's also true of working with white pencil and charcoal. So white charcoal pencil and black charcoal, you want to keep those separate. It makes this murky color when you blend it together, and it looks cheesy. Looks kind of amateur. So we're going to avoid that. Same is true with the white pastel and the red pastel. Those two don't blend together. So go ahead and ease off the shading as you work your way down with the white. You may have to do one light stroke and lift. I think I did that towards the end just to get it to be a soft, smooth transition there. You can kind of tell that my paper bag has a little bit of bumps and textures. I'm sure yours does too. Just work around it. It's fine. Yeah, I'm having to actually press it down to make sure it's flat. I had mine taped to a board. That's why that tape is there. It can help. If you have some masking tape and a board, I would recommend that. So I am going a little bit heavier on the top just to get that gradient where it's bright white at the top and then fade. But I'm not pressing as hard as I can. So the goal here is to really get that white to transition just as you did with the gray of the pencil. And it's hard. It's not easy to do. But knowing how to do this will help your forms to turn. And I don't care if I'm talking about basic forms like cone or a sphere. I also mean complex forms, like when we do the eyeball later this week. It's a skill you're going to need when we do that. And you can see I'm careful to fill in the gaps. You don't want to have large gaps in between your stroke. That looks kind of sloppy. So it should be a smooth shift. And I don't recommend using crosshatch on this. So that's what your finished one should look like. And you can see on the sides there is no shading in the middle. There's a gap between the white and the graphite. And I just put my hand there so you can see how big those boxes are. You guys, I'm sure you're going to be great at this. Please remember to turn it in.